If you've had any experience with the Tekken series, you've probably heard that Tekken is a hard game. A very hard game. It's acknowledged by the larger FGC community as being one of, if not the most difficult fighting game at a high level. And it's pretty easy to see why, right? The nature of Tekken being a 3D game means that there's an entire third dimension to worry about and factor into your strategy and game plan. This game has universal systems like tying basic defensive options like the backdash behind execution. Each character has like 200 moves, so there's always something new to worry about. We'd be here all day if we went over all the factors that make Tekken such an intense and difficult game. But a big part of that is also the characters. The Tekken series has always been really interesting in that it simultaneously features some of the easiest and most difficult characters you can get in a fighting game. I like to think that the easy characters serve as sort of a palate cleanser for players. The game itself is already extremely difficult, so let's give them a bunch of very simple characters to make up for it and make the player's experience more balanced. Makes perfect sense, right? And then, they also decide to give us some of the most technical and difficult characters ever seen before. For the real masochists, for those of us who want the ultimate fighting game challenge, playing the most difficult characters in one of the most difficult fighting games. It's like people who play Dark Souls games, which are already very difficult for most people, but then add extra challenges like no healing allowed or never upgrade their health. You might think this is crazy, but it's one of those things that you either get or you don't. The extra challenge of picking up these characters and the pure time and dedication it takes to succeed with them makes their eventual victory feel incredible. There's nothing like winning with a difficult character in fighting games. This is why us Mishima players have such pride. But what actually makes a character difficult in this game? What separates them from the more agreed upon easy characters? Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's three factors here. Execution and skill ceiling, the simplest to understand, moveset complexity, a little bit more complicated, and the difficulty of game plan, being very broad. We're going to be going in depth with all three of these factors and looking at a variety of characters in Tekken 8 as examples for these three core difficulty factors, starting with the most self-explanatory, the execution and skill ceiling of a character. This is what most people immediately think of when you call a character difficult to play. Execution is a core part of fighting games. There are thousands and thousands of iconic moments throughout all fighting games, showcasing the absolute insane things you can pull off with enough time and practice in the training mode. And this is the nature of execution in fighting games. Frame perfect moves, insanely fast links and combos, that kind of stuff. This is one core characteristic of some difficult characters in Tekken. Let's look at the most iconic move in the Tekken series, the Electric Wind Godfist. This move, by design, is difficult to pull off. Very difficult, especially for casual players. It requires a frame-perfect input, meaning 1/60th of a second to pull off, and getting used to the timing of this can take a long time. Characters with moves like the Electric are naturally going to be difficult, but it gets even worse when you start considering other factors. Imagine being forced to Electric to punish a -14 or 15 move on block as your main's only punishing tools. And keep in mind, this move is completely unbufferable, meaning you have to be very quick to pull this off. This is the struggle of Kazuya and Heihachi. While almost every character in the game has an easy 15-frame launcher to punish unsafe moves, they don't, and are forced to do this very difficult technique just to do something that every other character gets for free. There's a trade-off, of course, and the trade-off is that they get access to the Electric, arguably the best move in the game, but it's locked behind execution that, again, many other characters in this game just don't have. Look at Brian's taunt. It's honestly a pretty game-breaking move. A quick unblockable that, if done correctly, lets him do basically whatever he wants. The taunt jet upper is an unbelievably difficult technique to pull off, taking many people years and years of practice to get it down. Now, to play characters like Kazuya, Heihachi, or Brian, do you need this incredibly difficult stuff right away? No. And that brings us to the skill ceiling aspect of these characters. These characters have a ridiculously high amount of stairs to climb. You can pick them up and be constantly learning and practicing more and more stuff, almost forever. There's always more to learn and perfect on these characters, and even the best players in the world aren't consistent all the time with it. You'll see top players dropping electrics, especially perfect electrics, all the time, and it's the same for taunt jet upper. It's the same for King's instant blue spark throws, Lee's just frames, all of it. These characters have the biggest skill ceiling in the game. There's always more to practice, and as you progress with these characters, you'll slowly add more and more tools to your arsenal, becoming a stronger player in the process. There isn't much more to say about execution, as again, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just moves, techniques, combos, attributes these characters have that are incredibly difficult and require a lot of practice. Kazuya relies on his wave dash to get in your face and mix you up, something that characters like Alyssa can do with just the press of a button, so he's naturally going to be a far more difficult character. Devil Jin needs to rely on wall standing 3 cancels to get optimal wall carry, something a character like Victor can outdo him with 0 skill requirements whatsoever. Some characters are just going to need a lot more time in training mode and in the lab than others, and that's the first factor we have to talk about. Sorry to quickly interrupt this video, but if you guys are enjoying this and want to see more longer scripted Tekken 8 content like this in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel. It goes such a long way in helping me fight the YouTube algorithm and work towards my dream of hopefully one day doing this as a full-time job. Only about 21% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed, though it really is a big help. It's free to do, and it only takes 1 second of your time. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the video. The second thing we need to talk about is moveset complexity. Despite Tekken's identity being that all the characters have like a million moves, not every character is built equally in this regard. There's a ton of characters who are just pretty simple. They don't use a lot of moves, and an average player could understand their kit very quickly. Think characters like Claudio, Paul, Victor, and even some more difficult characters like Kazuya. This shows us that characters don't need to have all 3 factors to be considered among the most difficult characters in the game. Even the most legacy Kazuya mains will admit, his kit is not complex and is actually pretty simple to understand. He's difficult for completely different reasons, which we'll go on to explain later. But yeah, some characters take a long time to understand. Think characters like Ling Xiaoyu, Yoshimitsu, Steve, and Tuareg. Yeah, these characters are annoying and aren't the most fun to fight against, but you have to respect the time players put into these characters to fully understand them. Characters like these are incredibly complicated, and as such, a huge part of their moveset is relevant and needed for specific situations. For most characters in this game, how many moves do you use frequently? 20? 30 on the higher end? Yeah, for these guys you need way more. Rather than having god buttons that just do everything like a lot of the top tiers in this game, they instead have like 1,000 great tools that are each needed for very specific situations. Jin in Tekken 7 was the perfect example of this complex playstyle, before they largely oversimplified him coming into Tekken 8. Playing complex characters like this require you to spend an insane amount of time in training mode, watching guides, learning setups and flowcharts for very specific situations. There's just so much prep work that needs to go into playing and understanding them. Learning every good move they have and when to use it can be a huge time investment. There's just constantly so much to be thinking about at any given time on these kind of characters. As much as we hate fighting Tuareg, there aren't many other characters who will enter a stance like this and suddenly have to keep track of like 50 or 60 new moves that opened up. Look at Xiaoyu, she's probably the best example of complexity in this game. She's a character who revolves almost entirely around setups, around using each and every tool of like the 100 strong tools she has in her moveset for the exact perfect situation, chaining all of her pressure together for whatever specific situation she finds herself in, understanding all of her complex stances. Characters like this just have so much to think about. If you don't believe me, try learning Xiaoyu. You're going to be overwhelmed within the first second you start learning her. Characters who are difficult due to their complexity are about as far away from pick up and play as you can get in this game. They are very specialist characters, in which the difficulty comes not from their execution or game plan necessarily, but mainly just from the prep work it takes to learn them, and the knowledge demands in-game. These characters reward you heavily for taking a super deep dive into their moveset and really getting a fundamental understanding of the character, of all their matchups, of all their setups, everything. And that's just something a lot of other characters don't have to worry about nearly as much. Hopefully that made some kind of sense. The third and final trait we're going to be talking about today is difficulty in game plan. Like I mentioned before, this one is super broad, but I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. Pretty much every character has a general game plan in this game. It'll change depending on which characters you're fighting against and a variety of other factors, but there's usually still a game plan or focus that's relatively consistent. Let's look at a popular tournament character, and my main, Jin. What's Jin's general game plan? Poke your opponent down with your incredibly strong poking options, and pressure with your million safe buttons, because as you guys all know, everything is safe on Jin, and then when you get a counter hit or whiff punish, convert into combo and then repeat. This is a pretty consistently easy game plan. It doesn't change a lot, and doesn't require you to be completely aware and cognizant of your opponent all the time. Let's compare this to Jin's dad, Kazuya Mishima. Kazuya is understood as having a relatively simple game plan, but it's this simple game plan that makes it so incredibly difficult. He's probably the most predictable character in the game. Everybody knows what Kazuya wants. He wants to punish you with his flash punch combo, and then implement his 50-50. This is the core of the character, and him trying to apply this simple game plan, when everyone knows exactly what he's looking for all of the time, actually ends up making him one of the hardest characters in the game. Unlike Jin, he doesn't have a huge bag of tricks. He relies almost completely on mind games and outplaying his opponent, having better timing than them, applying his 50-50 properly, having good movement and good punishes, not surprising them with unfamiliar stuff, or abusing overpowered god moves. He has to actually play his opponent. That might sound obvious, right? I mean, it's a 1v1 fighting game. Of course you have to play your opponent. But a lot of the time in Tekken, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like a ton of people just play their character. They abuse matchup unfamiliarity to the point where it can sometimes feel like a single-player game. Characters like Kazuya don't have this luxury. Kazuya has a complete lack of poking or panic buttons, meaning every single move he uses has to be with a very specific and planned purpose. You really cannot just throw things out in this character, which again, is very rare in a game like Tekken. Let's look at a character like Steve, very unique character. He relies almost solely on counter hits. He has no 50-50 utility, and again, has to just poke you out and set up counter hits. If you never press into Steve, he can feel pretty damn useless. This character demands that you're constantly watching your opponent and trying to figure out how they play, when they want to press a button, when they want to sidestep, when they're scared and keep blocking, and respond accordingly. It might seem obvious, you might think that every character needs this, but in most levels of play, no. You really don't realize how privileged you are until you play a character like Steve or Kazuya. All of the counter hit characters are good examples of difficulty and game plan. Brian, Heihachi, and even King and Lee to an admittedly lesser extent. These guys just have to put in so much more effort than the average character just to implement their game plan and get started in the match. Generally, characters who rely almost exclusively on mind games are going to be so much more difficult than characters who can just go into a match and just apply a very basic game plan and not have to think too much. It requires a constant level of focus and adaptation that is largely missing in a lot of other characters in most levels of play. A big common thing with these guys is either a huge lack of panic buttons, a lack of gimmicks, or a lack of poking. I think lacking any of these things in this game instantly makes it far more difficult for you to execute your game plan. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense and my point got across. There's a lot of reasons that a character can be hard, but I feel like these three are the biggest ones and the most relevant in all levels of play. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with what I think makes a character difficult in Tekken 8? Or do you think they're wrong and there's other ones that I completely missed? Let me know in the comments. I'll be down there chatting with you guys as always. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe to support more scripted Tekken 8 content like this, and be sure to join my Discord server. The link's in the description. As always, big thanks to my YouTube members and Patreon patrons. I really couldn't do this without you. You guys have been such a big help. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next video.